Hey guys, I'm Amarat and it's time to get into map drawing tutorials now. So, in this video tutorial we are going to take a look at my brushes, how I make them, how I set them up, and I will share my brushes with you as well. So first of all, if you know how to make your own brushes in Photoshop, you can skip this video. That's it. Putting that aside, I'm using Photoshop Tier 17 CC. So if you've got way older Photoshop, perhaps some new version as well, it's possible that my brush file is not going to be compatible with your Photoshop. That's okay, you can make your brushes on your own as well. So in video description you can find download link for my brushes, for a file where my brushes are included. You can download them, you can use them. If you want to import them into your Photoshop, just go into Photoshop, select brush tool with B key, right click, go to this menu here and go to preset manager, and you can click on load button here and just load these brushes in and they will appear here, and then you are done. That's it. That's very simple. If this doesn't work for you, you will have to make those brushes on your own, and I'm going to show you now which brushes I use, why, how, and how to make them if you need to make them on your own, or for you to have some inspiration how to make your own custom brushes, or how to change mine, or whatever else you want to do really. So speaking about creating brushes now, how to make your own new brush. It's very simple. You actually paint whatever the fluff you want and you go to edit menu and click on define brush preset here. It creates a new brush, and then you can click on this button here when you've got that brush selected, and you can change its settings, and that's really it. That's very short version of doing it. Now long version, how to make brushes I use and showing you which brushes I actually use. So brush I use, I'm going to select black color. Brushes I use: star brush, a very simple one, very simple star. I use this for my cities. So my cities are marked by those stars on my world maps. So pretty much exclusive for world maps in this case. The second brush I've got here is something I use again pretty much only on world maps, and I use it for marking my coastlines. So you can draw islands like this. I think that it looks fairly good. It really looks like real islands, or you can make whole continents with it and so on. You know, it looks quite a lot like actual real map. So this is great brush. Another brush I use, those three brushes, I don't use them very much, if at all, very rarely, but you may want to use them in your maps, whatever you want. Then the next brush is square brush. I don't use it like this, I don't make lines with it, but I use it for making towers. So if I've got square towers in my city maps, I use this brush pretty much all the time. This brush I again don't use for making lines, but I use it for making random houses. Just by clicking, just placing random buildings all over the place, this brush is great for that. L brush works in the same way, it's just L. And you can make T brush as well for just making all different shapes of buildings on your city maps. Great one. And then I've got this brush here, which I use for blending textures. It doesn't look like much here right now, but if I bump its size up and use flow like 5% perhaps, you can already see what is going on here. You can use this brush as sort of spray to make two textures blend into each other, or to make one texture appear a little bit dirty perhaps, or something like that. I use this brush all the time on all of my maps. It's probably the most used and the most important brush for me. And the last but not least is basic round brush. I use the last one, which is this one, and the reason for it is very simple actually, because it has smooth edges. You can see that those edges are very smooth here, whereas when I use, for example, this one, you can see those edges are kind of jagged like this. There's very simple reason for it, but just so you know, I use the last one because it has smooth edges. So those are brushes I use. How to make such brushes? Fairly straightforward way of doing that. I'm by the way going to use keyboard shortcuts fairly extensively in those tutorials because it's just quicker. Learn to use keyboard shortcuts in Photoshop. Just do it. If you don't, you are going to be very slow when using it. So Ctrl N, create new file, and I'm going to make just very small canvas, 200 by 200. That's all we need. So how to make square brush, for example, that's the most easy one. We already have pretty much square brush. We just need to fill it. So Ctrl Shift N creates new layer, and G key selects paint bucket. So just make sure that you've got paint bucket here. If you don't, you need to right click on it and select it by your mouse. And by using black color, I'm going to just fill it everything with black color. Okay, I've got my square brush. Edit and define brush preset. I've got myself square brush. How to make L brush? Well, use M key, which selects this tool here. Just make sure that you've got rectangular marquee tool, or if you don't, right click again, select rectangular marquee tool. Just select a corner like this. Press delete. Ctrl D deselects, Ctrl D deselects what you have selected, and you can see that I've got my L brush. Again, edit, define brush preset. Feel free to slow this video down or watch it multiple times. I don't want to repeat myself all the time because there's a lot to talk about. So we've got already, as you can see, 2 new brushes here. I can make T brush as well if you want to. So just select smaller part here like this, and just what you can do now is click on what you've got selected. You can see that my cursor has changed, and move it here, delete this one as well. Okay, I've got myself T. So define brush preset, T. Now those brushes don't really work the way mine do right now, because you can see that all those squares R and L's and T's are the same for now. So we want to change it. How to change it? Well, use this icon here, brush, and for purposes of this tutorial I'm going to actually move it into a new panel like this, not really like this, just so you can see it all the time, and we can see it all the time. So I'm going to, you would have to do the same with all of them. I'm going to do it with just one. You need to select shape dynamics, just make it checked, and use size jitter, angle jitter, you can already see what it's doing to my brush, and roundness jitter to 100%, all of them. And you probably want to set some minimum diameter, or you may want to use smaller than 100% size jitter. So what this does, size jitter makes random size, angle makes random angle. So size is obvious, that's this one, angle is this angle here, and roundness is kind of squishing it like this. So now this brush, you can already see that it works now for me. It's creating random shapes like this. Great for making random houses. Do this with all 3 brushes. If you want to save it, by the way, if you don't want to lose these settings, you need to save it, and I'm going to save it as a new brush. So square random. Alright, and I've got myself random square, so I got random square brush, and I still have my default square brush like this. Great. So those are brushes for buildings. Moving on, this blending brush works in almost the same way. What I actually used is this brush, which is here by default in Photoshop. It doesn't look like much when I use it like this, but when you just click with it, it's pretty much like some sort of spray. And you can use this in the same way like we would use, for example, spray brush in Nugget when making a map, actual map for game. So spray, something very useful for blending textures together. The most used brush by me by far. So the way I set it up is, again, some shape dynamics, some angle jitter, roundness jitter, maximum actual, and what you want to also use is transfer. What transfer does for you is that it makes, so I will zoom in so you can see it, it makes random opacity and flow, obviously, so we can see that sometimes it covers a little bit more and sometimes it covers a little bit less. That's something what we need. We want it random as possible, pretty much. And we also want scattering, because without scattering it's just straight line like this. That's not really what we need or what we want. We want some scattering. So scattering, scatter to, I don't know, 150, something like that. Seems fine. But you can see now that it makes all the time kinda, you know, straight ends and straight starts of my lines. That's not really what I want, so I usually use both axes as well, setting on, and it tends to make these starts and ends of lines a little bit more, you know, a little bit more pointy. Now, I pretty much never use this brush with flow to 100%. What I actually do all the time is lowering flow to 10 or even 5%, and now you can use it really like spray for blending textures together. Great brush. And again, create new brush and save it as a new brush for yourself. This spatter brush. How to make star brush? Well, star brush, as you can see, doesn't have any settings, but its shape can be a little bit tricky for someone who is complete beginner. So the way of doing it, Ctrl A to select everything, delete. So how to make such star? You can see that it pretty much can be done by using four circles, by cutting corners out. And that's exactly what we are going to do. So fill it, so you've got square like this, and we are going to use elliptic marquee tool, and when you start selecting something it makes ellipse. Now when you press shift, it's circle. So make circle like this, so it's a little bit smaller than yours, than 1/4 of your square pretty much. And we want to move it to the corner like this and delete. Now when you've got this, we can go to rectangular marquee tool and select like this. So you can see that I pretty much selected my circle now, and that's really it. And now Ctrl C, Ctrl V, and we've got ourselves new layer with this circle being cut out. Now I'm going to delete this bottom layer, or you can hide it, whatever. And we already have pretty much part of our star here. Now we don't need this around that, so I'm going to select something like this. Just select part of it, delete it. Or what you can also do, by the way, wrong layer by the way. What you can also do is actually select what you want. So select this part and this part. I want to teach you this one trick as well. So this is what we want. We can now just Ctrl C and Ctrl V again, or we can actually use Ctrl Shift I keys, and it inverts our selection. And now we can delete this around what we don't want. Those keyboard shortcuts are going to be very useful for us in dungeons, in dungeon maps. So learn them. So this is one part of our star. What you can do now is press Ctrl and Alt keys, click on layer 2 or on your layer, and just move it. And you can see that it made a copy. It duplicated that layer pretty much. Do it 2 more times, and we've got 4 copies. What are we going to do now? Well, flip them. So Ctrl T, right click, flip horizontal, move it here, another one, Ctrl T, flip horizontal and flip vertical, move it here, another one, Ctrl T, flip only vertical, move it here. You got star, great. Edit and define brush preset. I got a new star here. Great, done. You can make a little bit more complex star. What you can also do now, by the way, is for example making it smaller and tilting it like this and do something like this. It's a little bit different star now. Whatever you want, just be creative, you know, get some ideas and try to be original if you can. Just try to monkey with it if you want to. So that's star brush. This brush, as you can see, it's again just shape dynamics. But the shape of this brush is actually a little bit tricky to get right, and there's not really one universal way of doing it. But you can see that what I actually did is I just painted by my round brush, for the small one in this case, not 200. You can change size of brush in different manner as well, by the way, in quicker manner, but I'm using this for whatever reason. Maybe 15. And shape I use is pretty much pointy one, a very rounded one, and then you want to get some angle as well, or some circle or something like this, for example. Let's try something like this. Just experiment with shapes, you know, different shapes are going to behave in different way. This may be interesting. So some random shape. What we actually want are three corners or three points which are kind of different. Every single one of them is a little bit different. This one is very pointy, this is somewhat a little bit less pointy, and this isn't pointy at all. So three parts of this brush which are different. Define brush, shape dynamics. What is very important here is roundness and angle, and you can already see what kind of shoreline it's going to produce for you. Smaller size, and yeah, this works. This seems to work fairly well. So yeah, that's how you make this kind of brush. Now talking about tree brushes. Tree brushes are not that simple to do because you need some tree. I don't really recommend trying to paint a tree. If you can paint a tree, well, good for you, great. If you can't, you can just download some tree, or you can make it in Photoshop. I'm not going to show you how to make tree in Photoshop, how to let Photoshop generate it pretty much. That will just make this tutorial too long. I suspect that it's going to be too long already anyway. But once you get yourself a tree from Google or by painting it if you can, again, you can see that I used just size jitter with some minimum diameter. I used roundness jitter. In this case, I use only small angle jitter because I don't want trees pointing downwards, obviously. I use some scattering. There's really nothing to worry about here. I use some noise. I don't really know for sure what it does. If I remember correctly, it produced a little bit better effect with noise than without it. So yeah, I use noise. But what is important here is color dynamics. And without it, you can see that those trees kinda just blend to each other. So that's why I use color dynamics. I've got foreground background jitter 15%, and then I've got other jitters to 5%. And what it does for me is that every single tree gets a little bit different color, which means that they don't blend into each other. And you can tell the one tree from the another one. That's pretty much what it's there for. So those are my brushes. The other tree brush works in exactly the same way, it's just different tree being used there. So those are my brushes I use, and I'm going to use all those brushes in my following up tutorials. Something I, by the way, didn't mention in a previous video, I am not using graphical tablet, at least not in those tutorials. I have graphical tablet, I use it from time to time, but I don't really need it for drawing maps. Alright, so you don't need it, you can just do it with mouse, doesn't matter. So that's it, guys. A very quick guide how to make your own brushes in Photoshop. I haven't covered all settings, and that's pretty much because I don't use other settings which are here. But you can try to monkey with them and find out whether they work for you or not. So just download my brushes, try to import them, try whether they work for you or not. You can tweak them, you can change them, you can make your own ones. Now you know how. And in the next video we are going to cover textures very briefly, and then we are going to move to probably to dungeon maps, because I think that dungeon maps are the most simple, at least basic dungeon maps. Alright guys, that's for it. That's everything I wanted to talk about today. I thank you for watching, and as always, happy map drawing!